I'm curious to hear your reaction to his comments that are in the Sunday Telegraph this morning, talking about the EU pursuing a similar goal to Hitler and trying to create a super-state. Is that helpful to the out-cause, do you think?
Well, I don't think he was saying that people who favour the European Union were comparable to Nazis. He was simply saying that historically, from the Romans, Charlemagne, Napoleon, there have been all sorts of attempts to dominate Europe, and these have all floundered because Europe is not naturally one entity.
So is it helpful to say it?
I don't actually think what he said, as it was said, was so outrageous. I think the headline is misleading.
Would you rather he hadn't said it, though?
I myself referred not so long ago, but was very careful to say I am not comparing people who support Europe to Nazis, but it actually is a fact. There were fascist theorists who believed very strongly in a united Europe.
Let's talk about the economy, shall we? Because, as we were saying, this week we've had warnings from the Bank of England and the International Monetary Fund about the risks of leaving the EU. The Governor of the Bank of England talked about a possible technical recession. Christine Lagarde from the IMF said that the prospects range from being pretty bad to very, very bad. Has the Leave camp lost the economic argument, do you think?
No, I don't think it's lost the argument. These are governmental institutions which are putting their viewpoint. They're all very closely connected. They know each other well. They work with each other. You know, the reports are written by very similar people. But against them, there are many private sector economists who take a different view, working for private sector institutions. There are many entrepreneurs who take a very different view. And there are a lot of professional private investors, well-known names in the city, who say Britain could prosper perfectly well outside the EU. You know, I think what we forget is that there are a very large number of countries who are not members of the EU, but who export and trade to the EU. This idea that is put around that somehow Europe is a fortress with great high walls and that you have to be in there and part of the rules in order to trade, I'm afraid that just is not true.
Mark Carney today is saying that Leave campaigners are in denial about the economic impact.
Well, I'm afraid I think he's in denial himself about the importance of trade agreements. I think they're vastly being overstated. Trade goes where trade will go. It goes where people have a good product and where there is a purchaser. Look at the United States. The United States, admittedly a much bigger economy than Britain, but thousands of miles away, it actually exports more to the EU than we do. Now, you can say it's a bigger economy, but it has absolutely no say in the rules, and yet it manages to trade. And when people say an alternative has not been specified to being in the EU, the alternative is not being in the EU.
And do you defend, Mark Carney rather has defended his own intervention. He says it's entirely legitimate. He said it would be irresponsible not to tell people about risks if they believed that they were there. Do you think that he was right to speak out as he did?
I don't think he was right to give the press conference in the terms he did. He obviously had the Monetary Policy Committee meeting and they presented their short-term report about the trend of inflation, and it is fair enough to refer to it there. But to go out and make yet another intervention. Don't forget, we've had several of these from Mark Carney, and talking about a recession. How can he possibly know whether there would be a recession or not? I mean, I don't believe there's any reason to think.
Well, they're forecasts, aren't they?
Yes, but forecasts are frequently wrong, and I may point out in particular, forecasts hardly ever foresee recessions. Forecasts generally just extrapolate the present into the future. And, you know, when people talk about a shock by definition is something unknown and unexpected.
This whole EU referendum campaign has caused great divides within the Conservative Party, hasn't it? I mean, your former colleague John Major has intervened this week and he's got some firm words for Conservatives in the Leave camp. Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, Ian Duncan-Smith. He's talked about some of their claims not bearing scrutiny, warned about the tone of some of the rhetoric in the campaign more broadly. Do you agree with him?
No, of course I don't agree. And he's right only on one point. I think he's right to say immigration should be handled as a sensitive issue. And I think it will be, and I think it has been handled as a sensitive issue. But I think there's a bit of an attempt on some people's part to try to shut down any debate whatever on open borders. And immigration is a legitimate subject for discussion in this referendum.
Can the party survive this kind of infighting?
Yes, I think it can. I think we've got to treat each other with respect. We've got to come together afterwards. I believe that can be done. It requires the leadership to be generous. It requires us all to be generous.
Can David Cameron survive the vote? If the Remain campaign loses, should David Cameron resign?
No, I don't think he should resign. I think even if the vote is to come out, my own personal view is that the Prime Minister, having given the people of this country an opportunity to decide, if they decide to leave, I think he should carry out the negotiation. I don't see why, having offered the people this, just because he took one side, I don't think he should resign.
Reports today suggest the next Tory leader, whenever that role becomes free, will be a Brexiteer, whatever the outcome of the vote. George Osborne appears to have a lot of ground now to make up once it was thought that perhaps he was the most likely successor. Do you think that Boris Johnson is the most likely next leader of the Conservative Party?
Look, we've got a leader of our party who is David Cameron. We respect him. He's going, in my opinion, he should remain the leader come what may. I'm afraid, to get drawn in who I think should be a leader when the Prime Minister steps down, as he said he will step down before the next election.
But do you think that it will be a Brexiteer who takes over?
You can't tell. You can't tell. Long way to go.
And what about George Osborne? There was a time, as I say, he was considered the front runner.
I really don't want to discuss. It's not a decision now. It's a decision that will be made much later.
OK, but you think that David Cameron will stay in the job, do you, until the next election?
I think he should. Yes, absolutely.